Persians and their allies in Toronto rallied for Iran to be free of the Islamic regime.
Taiwan accuses CBC of bowing to China after referring to the country as a self-ruled island in a correction.
The BC government is set to rename Surrey's Pattullo Bridge to a name in an Indigenous language. Hello Canada, it's Tuesday, June 24th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Georgia.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Hundreds of protesters, many waving pre-Islamic regime Iranian lion and sun flags and carrying images of exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, gathered in Toronto to celebrate the recent Israel and U.S. strikes on the dictatorship. Over 200 Canadians, many from the Israeli and Iranian diaspora, gathered at Mel Lastman Square, united in the hope that Iran will someday soon be free of the Islamic Republic. Many attendees were refugees who fled the regime and found safety in Canada. Two protests were held on Sunday, one a pro-regime and anti-war protest outside of the U.S. consulate in Toronto. The other, the rally held at Mel Lastman, was organized by Salman Seema, a refugee and survivor of torture at the hands of the Iranian regime. Seema told True North, quote, "Freedom unites us. When I see that my people in Iran are in pain, when I see the IRGC terrorists freely operating on Canadian soil, we need to do something. Freedom in Iran helps Canadians, helps Iranians, and helps all over the world. And I'm so glad that many people showed up today." The protests were held just a day after the U.S. used bunker busters in targeted strikes against three of Iran's remaining underground nuclear facilities, which Israel was unable to reach due to a lack of technology to do so. Seema said many of the Iranians in attendance were both hoping that civilian casualties would be limited in Israel and the U.S. war against the regime. Still, they are happy that many of their oppressors have already been eliminated by the strikes. The days of the Islamic regime may be numbered, but if the government there were to be toppled through a revolution or other means, what may come next, Geoff? And what kind of government are supporters of the Crown Prince calling for?
Yeah, Cosmin, if that were the case, the next steps would hinge on the diverse aspirations of Iran's supporters. There'd be a significant push for a structured transition guided by the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. The Toronto rally on June 15th, with over 200 protesters waving pre-Islamic lion and sun flags and carrying Pahlavi's image, signals strong backing for his vision. Pahlavi, in a press conference today, reiterated his stance from prior interviews, proposing to oversee a transitional government to facilitate a national referendum. He emphasized principles of national sovereignty, individual liberties, and secular democracy, aiming to replace the theocratic regime with a government reflecting the will of the people through a democratic vote, supported by an 80% desire for a democratic system, per a 2024 Gaman poll of 158,000 Iranians. This transition would likely involve dismantling the current theocratic structure, where the supreme leader holds ultimate power, and establishing a secular framework, a stark shift from the 1979 Islamic Republic Constitution. Pahlavi's plan includes forming a solidarity council, where he's the top candidate with 32 to 40% support among 34 contenders, to guide this process, potentially restoring a constitutional monarchy or a republic based on referendum results. Supporters at the rally, including Salman Seema, a torture survivor, see this as a path to freedom that benefits Canada and the free world by curbing IRGC influence on Canadian soil. However, challenges do loom. Internal divisions, economic collapse post-regime, and potential resistance from hardliners could complicate the shift, with the outcome depending on how effectively Pahlavi's transitional leadership navigates these hurdles towards a secular democratic future. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed displeasure after the CBC News referred to Taiwan as a self-ruled island rather than an independent nation. The country is now suggesting that Canada's public broadcaster might have used that phrasing to keep China happy. The article in question was discussing a Taiwanese Buddhist group practicing in Prince Edward Island. While reporting on ties between the Buddhist group Bliss and Wisdom and the Chinese Communist Party, it described one monk as being, quote, between his home country, Prince Edward Island, and China. CBC News later issued a clarification on Wednesday, which further failed to acknowledge Taiwan as an independent state. A story about a Buddhist group on PEI inadvertently referred to Taiwan as a country, it read. Continuing, it said, quote, In fact, Taiwan is a self-governing island, and sovereignty claims over the territory are disputed. Corrections were broadcast on radio and television, and a notice was posted to the story online. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded with a statement to the media, saying that Taiwan, quote, is a sovereign and independent country and is not subordinate to the People's Republic of China. CBC News did not respond to True North's request for comment, but later released a video announcing the clarification on its website. So, Cosmin, Taiwan is saying the CBC folded under pressure from Beijing to avoid referring to Taiwan as a sovereign nation. Have there been any other cases that you can think of where the CBC has been accused of placating the Communist Chinese government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the case throughout the pandemic where the CBC insisted that the lab leak origin was a conspiracy theory playing right into the hands of the People's Republic of China. When today we know that the lab leak is definitely one of the more likely scenarios of the origin of COVID-19. Yet for years, I think at least 2 years' time, the CBC, along with the legacy media, claimed and tried to shut down any questioning of the lab leak origin, saying instead that the pandemic originated from a natural contact between humans and animals, which doesn't seem to be the case. All evidence is pointing to the lab leak theory. And additionally, intelligence agencies have confirmed that the lab leak is definitely one of the most possible origins of the virus. And this is just one example. The CBC insists on repeating and parroting CCP talking points. And I'm not even sure who requested this correction, but they seem to oblige them as quickly as possible. And it's really concerning when a public broadcaster, arguably the one of the largest media companies in this country that is solely funded by taxpayers, kowtows and bends over to requests that accommodate Chinese sentiments. The new bridge replacing the historic Pattullo Bridge is set to receive a First Nations Indigenous name. Officials confirmed Saturday that the Musqueam and Kwantlen First Nations are collaborating on the new name, which will replace the Pattullo designation. The current bridge was named for Thomas Dufferin Pattullo, BC's premier during the Great Depression and early Second World War. Although the new name has yet to be publicly announced, it is part of a broader initiative to change names from English to Indigenous languages. That initiative was on full display Saturday with the unveiling of a large concrete mural beneath the newly opened Highway 17 Old Yale Road overpass. The bridge is expected to open in the fall after multiple delays. The replacement structure will feature 4 wider lanes, 2 in each direction, separated by a central barrier and pathways for pedestrians. The bridge's cost has ballooned to over $1.6 billion, up from the initial $1.3 billion budget. This renaming aligns with a growing movement by governments to endow Indigenous names to public infrastructure. Similarly, Vancouver's Trutch Street was renamed with a Indigenous language name, and it was the first official use of a non-English alphabet for a Canadian street. So, Geoff, there's obviously a movement pushed by First Nations, activists, etc., that are trying to rename certain public infrastructure, whether it's streets, bridges, schools even, to accommodate Indigenous languages. Has there been any other recent name changes that are, let's just say, unreadable and perhaps unpronounceable to most Canadians not familiar with these Indigenous languages?
Yeah, Cosmin, this is a trend we're seeing across Canada, with several streets and landmarks undergoing similar changes to honor Indigenous heritage. One example is the renaming of Trutch Street in Victoria to Suet Street in 2022, reflecting the Lekwungen word meaning to be true. Another is the transformation of Highway 11 in Manitoba to Louis Riel Trail in 2001 to honor the Métis leader. Both were moves aimed at reconciliation. And now such renamings are again becoming common as governments seek to address colonial legacies, with the Pattullo Bridge's new name set to be unveiled after its fall 2025 opening following suit. However, some recent name changes have sparked debate due to their unreadable and unpronounceable nature for most Canadians, as I will now demonstrate. The article mentions the renaming of a street in Kamloops to to Kamloops to Secwepemc, reflecting the local Secwepemc language, which many residents find challenging to pronounce without guidance. Similarly, in 2023, a park in Prince George was renamed Ledley Tene Memorial Park, honoring the local First Nation but leaving many non-Indigenous Canadians struggling with the unique phonetics. These examples, while culturally significant, illustrate a growing tension, with public frustration with these names feeling disconnected from everyday use, potentially alienating taxpayers who fund these projects, like the $1.6 billion Pattullo upgrade.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.